So, we said chapter 1, environment of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible. Chapter 2, ancient Israel, the Bible. Number 3, chapter 3 were the Greeks. And that was a part of the secular tradition. Number 4, these two things that I told you about before last time, Athens and Jerusalem. It was the tradition of Athens and tradition of Jerusalem, namely the secular tradition and the religious tradition. Where are them? Oh, well, I forgot my... Or I lost them somewhere. Not this here. Anyways, does it work? Jerusalem and Athens coming together. Where did I put them? But coming together through Macedonia and conquest of Alexander the Great. So, what are these conquests of Alexander the Great? I think they have it here. There is a map somewhere here. Does it make sense? Maybe. Let's do Google Maps. Okay, this is our Jersey. Getting out. This is the Mediterranean, India. So far we've been looking at the Near East and then Greece, and slowly you'll see we're going to expand into the Mediterranean. And we're going to stay in the Mediterranean for another 1,000 or so years. But Alexander the Great inherited a unified Greece from his father. His father was called Philip of Macedon, king of Macedon, and it's one of the Greek states in the north of Greece, right here, Macedonia, with the capital of Thessaloniki. Just FYI. And Philip unified the Greeks by the power of by force, right? By force. And he left this inheritance to Alexander. And Alexander was a great warrior. So we're going to talk about his wars. Other than that, I don't know what his achievements were. But what he did was to conquer the whole of Middle East. And it happened in the time span of several years, so very quickly. First Asia Minor, what is called Turkey. Then the whole of Persian Empire, which consisted of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Iran. And then by conquering the whole of Persian Empire and the Greek parts, he didn't stop there, but continued into Afghanistan and states of Central Asia, through Pakistan, through the Indus River Valley, all the way to India. He wanted to go further into China, Tibet and China. It's the way to get into the road that goes from here, from Afghanistan, into China, through the desert, Taklamakan Desert, all the way to the city of Xi'an. Let's zoom it out a little bit so you can see. That's the route Alexander wanted to take. It's an impossibly difficult route, but it goes through the Himalayas mountains, and then through the desert, and then here where you see the green, there is the first city, Xi'an. where you kind of get into China proper, because this is the desert. And this is Tibet, and this is the desert, Taklaman Desert. Anyways, so he wanted to go to China, and his soldiers said, we've seen enough. We want to go home. So they decided to go back home, and Alexander led them back home and kind of died there. That's a short story. The story could be retold, maybe a little bit more details. Let's see. There is a PowerPoint that will give you more details. No. Here. You have the years, the reign of Philip of Macedon, 359, 336. In 338, there was a battle with a coalition of city-states that wanted independence of Greek city-states, didn't want Macedon to rule. The Battle of Chaeronea, which Philip won, and unified whole Greece. So, up to here is, the years are really not so important for us, but the idea is, right, that Philip unified all of the Greek states under his rule, and then comes Alexander in 326, and he immediately convinces the Greeks to cross over the Aegean, right? Aegean would be here. And attack Persian-controlled Asia Minor. There are a couple of interesting things that happened there. The official excuse that Alexander gave to his soldiers and generals was, we are going to take revenge on the Persian invasion that happened in 490 and 480 BC. But that's 150 years back in time. But anyways, that's what he told them. There was a city here called Gordion, where, according to the legend, there was a huge knot made of rope, this big, and nobody could untangle that knot. And Alexander came in with a sword, cut it off in half, and did it. And the importance was that, the prophecy was that whoever untangles this knot will rule the world. Yeah. So it's an indication that from very early on, Alexander, in particular his mother, was kind of strong supporter of this idea, that Alexander is somehow divine. That he's not an ordinary person, that he's divine. And you see this in the coins that he made for himself. He's often portrayed with some sort of horns here, which at that time it was a sign of a divinity. Anyways, from there, Alexander followed the coast, liberating one Greek city after another, and finally came in here into the Taurus Mountains, where there was the first major battle with the Persian Empire. The Persians actually led him. The Persian Empire controlled the whole enchilada, so to speak, from Egypt all the way to Afghanistan. So they let him come in, and they're waiting for him here. This was the Battle of Issus, one of the more famous battles in ancient history. And you have where was it? It's not a picture of it, but you have a painting that is preserved, on a wall painting that is preserved. In antiquity, one of the few, that we have from antiquity. This is Alexander over here, and this is the Persian emperor Darius, sort of running away. Interesting painting. Because you would think that, this is the victory of Alexander, that Alexander would be somewhere in the middle. But no, it's the Persian Empire who is sort of running away, and Alexander on his horse coming in. Anyways, this story of Alexander was preserved in a poem. It's sort of like a novel. I mean, it's better to say a novel, which was read then through history as one of the most popular books ever. So it had enormous influence, throughout history on all sorts of conquerors. I'm not a big fan of, of conquering things, so you might notice that I don't enjoy it so much. But people through history have enjoyed it. Alexander as a sort of an epitome, an essence of conquering. So, I don't know. Napoleon loved it, and so on and so forth. But that's for us in the future. So, this Battle of Issus was the first major battle between the Persians and Alexander. And Persians lost, Alexander won, and they retreated into the heartland of the empire. That would be Media and Persia, right? Persepolis, that's the capital of the Persian Empire, and various provinces of Persia. Here you have Media, Parthia, Persia. Anyways, so Alexander then followed the coastline and conquered one after another of the Phoenician cities. That would be Lebanon. How nice. Lebanon was called Phoenicia or Phoenicia. K or C doesn't really matter. One is more Greek, one is more Latin. That's Lebanon. And including Jerusalem, and went all the way into Egypt, conquered Egypt. And you just wonder in terms of strategy, why would Alexander not pursue Persians immediately into the heartland, but instead he would go into Egypt? Can you think of a good reason not to? Like, you won the battle here, the Persians are retreating into Mesopotamia, back into Persia. Why not follow them up?
Probably because there's probably more in the homeland.
In the what?
There's more soldiers in the homeland.
More
soldiers in the homeland.
You need more soldiers?
No, like if there's.
Oh.
He probably doesn't have enough soldiers to go into the homeland because that's where they have more soldiers.
Yeah. So why would he go into Egypt?
So build alliance?
To get the food. In other words, he wanted to obtain a food supply for his soldiers. More Greeks would come then into Egypt, organize themselves, be well fed, and then go further, right? Egypt was the richest land in antiquity. So it was a big prize. And you ensure you have the finances, and if something happens in Greece, you can send Greeks back to Egypt, and so on and so forth. So it gave him a lot of flexibility there. Anyways, so I don't know, there's a famous episode that he goes into this city here, Oasis, Siwa. There was an oracle there, oracle to the god of Ammon, Egyptian god. And he went in there and he came up with these stories that, his mother actually really slept with Zeus and kind of gave birth to Alexander and so on and so forth. So basically from that time, he considered himself as a divinity. And you will see that it will cause us some problems in the future, let's say, put it that way. There is things coming up that, there were, like, in particular, I don't know, let's not hide it. For the Israelites, this is going to be a problem. Anyways, He then comes back to continue the pursuit. He comes back, and in 331, the Persian and Macedonian, or the Greek army, they met here. Let me, I'm going to have it here on the list. Met here at Gaugamela, which is in the northern Iraq, and there was a decisive battle in 331, when he once again conquered the Persians. And this Persian Empire managed to flee the battlefield again, but he was caught by his own people and killed. In other words, his own people realized he's over. He continued all the way to Persepolis, the Persian capital, which is out there in the mountains of Persia. Let me show you here. This is Persia right here. You have mountains right here by the Persian Gulf. Well, the Gulf states are on the other side, the oil states, right? This is Iran on this side, and Persia is an area of the highlanders. There was a great city there, Persepolis, which I'd like to show you. So I'm going to pull out some sort of a picture. Persepolis, which means the city of the Persians. These are the remnants of Persepolis. It was a Persian highland capital. Persia sort of had a winter capital and a summer capital. In the summer, they would go to Persepolis because it's up in the mountains and the weather is nicer in the summer. But in the winter it gets cold, so they would come down to Mesopotamia and had their capital at Susa. The reason that Alexander came over here is this was this was a place of annual humiliation for many people that the Persians conquered. Persians had a reputation of being relatively easygoing people. Namely, they just required all the city-states that they conquered to submit themselves, and annually, once a year, send a representative to Persepolis to show to the Persians respect to the King of Kings, to the Emperor of Persia. And you have actually a great relief, like a wall carving. I don't know if they have it here. Usually they do. No, these are all the remnants. Right. This is it. On the walls there was a huge ceremonial hall with 10,000 columns and things of that sort, and representatives of all the nations that the Persians conquered were kind of carved in the wall in stone, bringing offerings to the Persian Empire, to the Persian Emperor in person. This was supposed to be done every year as a remnant. Otherwise, Persians would let these city-states run their own affairs. So that was the nature of Persian rule. Well, Alexander came in and destroyed and burned this capital, which is one of the more serious war crimes. But anyways, this is what happens. So, a couple of interesting things happened. He chose Babylon. Babylon is outside of Baghdad. And it's an old Mesopotamian capital, one of the largest cities in the world. So Alexander chose Babylon as his capital. And after conquering the Persian Empire, there was an interesting event in Babylon. He gathered his generals, his deputies, and had a wedding for himself and for them too. So they were forced to marry Some of them didn't like it because they were already married. But he married a Persian princess under the name of Roxanne. I mention it always because when I was younger, that was a popular song in high school by Sting. You know Sting? Sting?
I probably do.
Huh?
I heard of it.
Old guy, so I don't know, right? Anyways, so Alexander married Roxanne, and his generals were supposed to marry local princesses. And this is what we call multiculturalism. Well, yes. These are the origins of it. Alexander decided the policy of what we call the melting pot. Now, a more fashionable name is multiculturalism. They call it mixing. The Greeks call it mixing. And it's mixing of Greek and Oriental, Near Eastern cultures. So in Greek it was called syncretism, which means mixing. Mixing. Syncretism. So wherever you have a mixing of cultures, that is called syncretism. It's another word for you guys to remember, right? Did it work? Yeah. Yes and no, as any policy. It worked in some ways and it didn't work in others. For example, an obvious example of this policy working is the Bible. Basically, the Christian part, the New Testament, right? The New Testament is written in what language?
In Greek?
Huh?
No, Hebrew?
In Greek.
Oh, Greek, right?
Right. And that's a big surprise to a lot of people because, people usually expect, oh, it's a Jewish story, so it's written in some sort of a Jewish language that we call Hebrew. But no, it's actually written in Greek. Oh, well, that's interesting. Then did Jesus speak Greek? Huh?
Well, I think everyone spoke Greek at that time. It was biblical times, right?
Well, biblical times, but biblical times are thousands of years, right? So there are biblical times earlier, there are biblical times later. That's a trick question. We don't know the answer to it. But all the indications of all the writings that we have from that time, none of them are in Hebrew. They're all in Greek. There is a bit of an exception. I don't know if you heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Dead Sea Scrolls are actually, it's this lake right here. It's not a sea, it's actually a lake. River Jordan goes in from Syria and actually empties in here into the desert. It's one of the strangest things because the whole river flows into this lake, but the lake doesn't flow anywhere else. So it actually expires, right? Because it's a desert and it's very hot. So all the water that comes in, so therefore the lake is very salty. The concentration of, so actually when you swim on the lake, you float. Anyways, you can't sink in that lake. But anyways, it's called that because salt sort of kills everything, right? And anyways, by a cave over here, they found scrolls in a cave. They were roughly 2nd century BC, 2nd into 1st century BC. And they were written in Hebrew and what is called the Aramaic. Aramaic is the language of Syria. Some things here, I'm just imagining. Aramaic is the language of Syria. Hebrew is the language of the Israelites, but for our purposes, all the other writings were in Greek. So there is a bit of a debate. Did Jesus actually spoke Greek? Did he speak Greek? I would think that that's more accurate because that's what the evidence points out. All the things that Jesus said were recorded in Greek. I doubt that those who recorded it were saying, "Oh, let me translate this." So this policy of mixing, of syncretism. And this was a success of the policy. The failure of the policy came in also very quickly. Well, first of all, we'll get more into about these conquests of India and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Central Asia. And I told you that then from Persepolis, Alexander decided to get into Afghanistan, traveled around here, came back into India. So that's coming up. But overall, as a big picture, I can tell you that the Greeks really didn't move too much further east from the Mediterranean. The successors of Alexander, once Alexander died, the Greeks centered themselves in the great cities of Alexandria, in Egypt, and Antioch in Syria. And from these two great cities, Alexandria was here on the coast, so it can communicate to Greece very quickly. And Antioch was here on the river around this. So it wasn't really on the coast, but it was on the river, so you can reach the city from the river right here in Syria. But the rest of it, the Greeks sort of quickly gave up. And that becomes, the Persian Empire comes back, revives itself under a tribe of Parthians. And later on, even in the future, is going to be the land of Islam, where Islam is going to spread and dominate it. But that's coming up in the future. Let's first finish with Alexander. Let's kill him, so to speak. And then we'll go to what happened after he died. So, he tries to get into Central Asia, explores the various roads from Central Asia, former Soviet republics. So we're talking about Afghanistan and this Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan. And this was sort of a Persian backyard. And it's a very strange area. It's in the middle of the Asia. It's surrounded by very high mountains, the Himalayas right here, and the Hindu Kush that goes this way. And the mountains of Central Asia here, Caucasus, and so on and so forth. So it's a steppe land. Which we here in America call the prairies. And you've been to the prairies in the Midwest? It's boring. It's flat land and grass, and it goes on like you drive through Ohio and further west. And there's nothing, no mountain, nothing, there's flat. But it's the land of horses. So anyways, because there was a lot of grass. So, it was a land that it's kind of impossible to conquer because it's so huge. And you have these tribes of horse riders, people who ride horses, who would, often come together and, organize themselves and go on a rampage somewhere. So this is sort of this area here, Central Asia, was throughout history sort of a reservoir of trouble. Because various tribes in antiquity of horse riders, and they are excellent horse riders. You can just see, if you just go there and see the show with horses, kind of like a rodeo. Way better than in Texas. Like in Texans are very proud of the rodeo. So anyways, these people throughout history were sort of a reservoir of problems. They would organize themselves and just go and conquer India, conquer the Middle East, go over here and get into Europe and so on and so forth. So have in mind, because this will come back in the future. But Alexander tries to come in, and what he does is he organizes, builds several cities, modestly named after himself, Alexandria, right? But the most important Alexandria is going to be Alexandria in Egypt. But he built a couple of cities here in the middle of nowhere, and they stay there. They survived for 50 years, and then they were swallowed by the local people who said, okay, enough with these Greeks, and just kicked them out. The point was that he was trying to get into India, and that's the pass, Karakoram Pass, that goes from Afghanistan into India and China. And, anyways, he comes into India, fights the Indians for a while, gets into the Indus River, which is now in Pakistan. I don't know, the book mentions it, so I should mention it too. Encounters this Indian strategy of fighting with elephants, which is a huge surprise because elephants are huge, right? And the Greeks eventually learned that there are actually two kinds of elephants. The Indian elephants, which are a little bit smaller, they have smaller ears, and the African elephants, which are bigger and have bigger ears. But that's sort of like, alligators and crocodiles. Yeah, different things, but sort of a little bit different, but more or less the same. So anyways, he fights up and down the Indus River with various Indian kings. This actually had an effect on India, that the Indians soon after united themselves under the rule of their great emperor Ashoka, which he came after Alexander, a unifier of India. And I told you before that he wanted to go into China. His soldiers said no. Let's go back home, and they came down the river all the way to the port city. Here, Karachi is the port of Pakistan. What is, West India. And the majority of the army boarded ships and came back to Mesopotamia all the way to Babylon. Alexander decided to, I want to do one more feat of strength, and that would be to cross the desert of eastern Iran, right here, which had a reputation of being impassable. Nobody was able to cross it. So they do this, go through the desert, into the highlands of Persia, right here. And it was a catastrophe. Thousands of his soldiers died. Alexander got sick. He came to Babylon ill and died. And that's the end of the story of Alexander, right? So far so good, we killed Alexander. I don't know, there are two kinds of people. A lot of people are fascinated with Alexander because of all his successes. There you have the timeline. Enters India on the Hydaspes River, and the death of Alexander in 323. That's him. Died very young, at the age of 33. And you have these journeys kind of mapped out here. Backtrace Afghanistan and then Indus Valley, Hydaspes River, coming back and through the desert into Persepolis, and then died in Babylon. What comes next are the consequences of Alexander's mixing of cultures, this conquest. It's one way to look at it. This conquest as a mixing of cultures comes together. His successors did not keep the empire unified. Persians were good at it. Persians kept their the empire unified for thousands of years. But the Greeks were not. This was just an exception for the Greeks. Alexander in general is a bit of an exception for Greek history because Greeks were never able to be unified. They would always split into these city-states. That's what they liked. And that's what they did. Empire of Alexander separated in, well, here they have 4. Okay, you can say 4. Maybe there's a little bit more, but let's not torture you with more names. So there were kings, his generals, who took over after him and continued to rule over those areas. So, for example, in contrast to Athens and Sparta, which we have as the major cities in Greece before Alexander, now after Alexander, the Macedonians rule out of the city of Thessaloniki, which is a beautiful city in the north of Greece. It's close to a great river, Axios. It empties here in the Thermaikos Gulf. And beautiful harbor, one of the second largest city in Greece today. But throughout history, actually, this was the largest city in Greece from this point on. And again, you have this mentality of the Greeks, that the Greeks are urban people. They don't like crossing the Watchung Mountains. What happens when you cross the Watchung Mountains? You know the Watchung Mountains? You're from Jersey, right? And you go west, and you have this Watchung Mountains, and the moment you cross the Watchung Mountains, you can't hear the radio from New York anymore. You know what I mean?
I've been up there a
Huh?
lot. I've been there a lot of times.
Yeah, it's a nice view of the city and so on and so forth. But as soon as the branch of the Watchung Mountains are the Palisades that fall into the Hudson River, right? So these are the mountains that go up from the Hudson River, from the Passaic River, and Hackensack River. They go up, and there is a ridge on Interstate 78 actually. Into 78 goes up and then goes down to Pennsylvania. And you cross the Watchung Mountain, you get into a different world. You get into Pennsylvania. It's no longer New York, even not Jersey.
Mm-hmm. It's
Well-
kind of like the Delaware Water Gap, the Mount Tammany.
Yeah.
I've been
That's-
there, and you look and you see like New York and Jersey.
Yeah. And they look at us differently. I don't know, I have a friend down in South Jersey. And honestly, they don't like us too much. North Jersey, I don't go there too much. It's kind of like, you've seen that? No? Haven't. City people and rural people in general, well, I'm not going to say that we don't like each other, but there is a lot of teasing going on. You go further out into Pennsylvania, into South Jersey, they listen to more of country music, and Little differences. Well, this sort of mentality is the mentality of the Greeks. But the Greeks are really urban people. They, they build this city, and they don't like going too much into the countryside. Everything happens there in the city. That's the way the Greeks are, and that's in general something that the ancient Romans inherited from the Greeks. Persians were not like that. Actually, Persians were exactly the opposite. I mean, they had a city, this Persepolis, which means the city of the Persians, but it was not a city in the Greek sense, because the Greek cities are in the center of communications. You have the river coming in, you have the sea, you have the mountains around here, you have commerce, you have a port, things are happening, like in New York here, It's a port city, basically. You go on the Verrazano Bridge and you see the ships coming in and out, huge container ships, bringing in things from Europe, from Africa, from Latin America, from China. That's sort of a Greek idea. Trade, sell things, buy things, and do the advertising. Lie about it. What's advertising? It's about lying. You buy this product, it's the best product ever, it changed my life. Am I telling the truth? No, I'm lying to you. But it's a good product. And if I say it's a good product, nobody's going to buy it. How do you like this, oh, it's good. I'm not going to buy it. Anyways, that particular thing the Greeks called rhetoric. And we call it, take it with a grain of salt when they advertise something to you. Anyways, where I was going was that there were 4 centers of Greek civilization. Antigonus was one of Alexander's generals who became a king of Macedonia, and he ruled over Macedonia for centuries. I mean, his family, right? Or family, this is dynasty. Dynasty means family. Ptolemy was one of Alexander's generals, and he became a king of Egypt. But he didn't rule Egypt from traditional Egyptian capitals. Traditional Egyptian capitals were right outside of Cairo. There is a city of Memphis. Memphis, Tennessee is named after this. Memphis of Egypt, right? And actually, anybody been to Memphis, Tennessee? They built a huge pyramid over there. They have like a convention center, but it's built like a pyramid out of glass. It's funny. It's on the Mississippi River. Anyways, there is some sort of connection between, and they wanted to make a connection between Memphis, Tennessee, and Egypt. So if you ever go, think of this. So the Greeks didn't rule Egypt from here. Modern day Cairo is sort of a continuation of ancient Memphis. It's just a new incarnation of the old city. But the Greeks ruled Egypt from here, from Alexandria, which is the second largest city in Egypt, and actually the harbor needed to be built. So the Greeks built a harbor so to become familiar. That's the world that they knew. The world of the ships. They built a famous lighthouse, which was supposedly not supposedly, it was the largest lighthouse, the highest, the tallest lighthouse in the ancient world. The Pharos, which means the light. So anyways, it means a stream of light.
It sounds like Spanish.
Hmm?
That Spanish word.
Oh, is the same one? Yeah. There is a connection throughout the Mediterranean. Alexandria was basically a Greek city up until recently, up until the 1950s. when the Egyptian ruler, president Nasser, sort of decided to kick the Greeks out of Alexandria, and hundreds of thousands of Greeks were kicked out. The whole of Mediterranean becomes unified, first under the Greeks and then under the Romans. So there is a huge exchange of words between, I don't know, Greeks here and Romans here and the Spaniards over here. So this is coming up, future attractions. And so this is Ptolemy, right? Ptolemy and the Kingdom of Egypt. And we have Pergamene dynasty of Asia Minor. They were called the Attalids. Attalid dynasty of Asia Minor. And there is a city over here called Pergamon. No, I can't find it right now. Oh, there it is. Pergamon. It's pronounced a little bit different, Bergama. It's one of the Greek cities on the coast of Asia Minor. And finally, another great city that they built was right here. Antakya, which comes from the ancient Antioch. So it's not on the coast, but there is a river actually that flows through the city. I don't know if you can see it right here. There is a river that flows into the city. So you can, with a ship, you can come into the river and get to the city of Antioch. So, where is the mouse? This is going to be on the tests because it's kind of good for quizzes. Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia and the new city of Thessaloniki. Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt, ruling from the new city of Alexandria. Pergamene dynasty of Asia Minor, or Attalid dynasty of Asia Minor, ruling from the city of Pergamon. And finally, the Seleucid dynasty of Syria, ruling from the city of Antioch. So far, so good. So, it might be a good idea, to kind of stop. And one of the things I don't like too much about these conquests is that they usually cover up what happened here. And that's what I would like to ask, like, what happened here with Alexander? It was more than just a conquest. Conquest is always a consequence of something else. In other words, what happened was that the Greeks, in their classical age, developed a better civilization. Better in a sense superior, in a sense more efficient. I don't mean racially superior, I mean superior in terms of things that they're able to do. The Greek soldiers were better than the Persian soldiers because they had better equipment, they had better training, they had a better strategy of the way of fighting the war. The Persians didn't keep up with it, they were defeated. So the Greeks were, better at trade. They invented money. They tried to make money, sell this, buy this, so on and so forth. They invented education, started educating people into Iliad and Odyssey and drama and this sort of things. And education does strange things to people. That's why you're here, so to speak. It could be very boring, but after a while it kind of grinds you into a new person. sorry to tell you this, maybe you didn't sign up exactly for this kind of thing. But supposedly the goal is that, you know, you would become a person that is, well, number one, that you can do things. It was supposed to give you skills. Oh, all right? That's why we train the doctors. If something happens, he can open you up, pull something out. Oh, we don't need this, okay. Yeah. Right. So you have to know things to be able to do it. And the same thing, you know, with financial advisors, things like that. That's the purpose of education. And that's sort of what the Greeks figure out. You do education not because, I mean, I sort of like it and I enjoy it. That's, you know, I do it for a living. But most people don't. But the purpose of it is to give you the skills so you can do something. And that's what the Greeks figure out better than the Persians. That's why the Persians were defeated. So, we have this mixing of cultures that is called then Hellenistic culture, right? Hellenistic culture. And, well, technically speaking, the Greek culture would be said as Hellenic culture. Hellas means Greek, Greece. So things that are Greek are then called Hellenic. But we don't call this Hellenic, we call Hellenistic, which means literally Greek-like. So kind of Greek. It's Greek, but it's syncretism, it's mixing. It's the Greeks in Syria, and the Greeks in Egypt, and the Greeks in Asia Minor, and so on and so forth. All these four big centers that developed. What are the characteristics of these Hellenistic kingdom? Let's leave the Romans for now. They have it listed here in a more organized way than I do it. I kind of try to get you to understand what is going on. They put it formally here, you know, urban centers with primarily Greek culture and political institutions. Well, you know, that's what I was trying to tell you. Thessaloniki and Pergamon and Antioch and Alexandria and building a lighthouse and so on. Economic trends in the Hellenistic world. Continued agrarian patterns with expanded commerce. Well, that's the point that they built Alexandria and Antioch and these port cities, Thessaloniki, so that they can trade. New opportunities for women. What is in here? I'm probably imagining this. There's nothing in here. Education in literature, arts, music, and athletics. Why they're mentioning the role of women here? Did something essentially change for women and the relationship between the men and women in the Hellenistic period? I don't think that the change so much has to do with the conquest of Alexander as it has to do with the shift from a city-state to a monarchy. So these new Greek cities, Thessaloniki, Alexandria, Antioch, Pergamon, were monarchies. So they were not aristocratic republic, they were not democracies. In a monarchy, politics goes out of the window. Because you have a monarch who decides things. So if you get to be political, you might offend the monarch, the king. So, in general in antiquity, and maybe it still works like this today, maybe not, who knows, I don't know, anyways. But in antiquity, the democracies, like Athens, were more male-oriented, because males by their, I don't know, is it our nature or something, we like politics. Males could be silly, we like to fight, and that's why male likes politics. We'll see today when Trump and Biden start exchanging blows tonight, right? It's going to be nasty. We're all looking forward. Anyways, but that's sort of, politics is a competitive sport. And for some reason, males like to be competitive. I don't know why. Is it biology? Who knows? People are having different theories about why this is happening. But in a monarchy, it's kind of strange. Even though you have a king, women, at least at court, have a much important role. Because the way that the politics operate in the kingdom, you have to go through the king. And the best way to get to the queen is to know the queen. Because the queen can, tell things to the king that otherwise he wouldn't listen. So the role of women sort of increases in a monarchy for God knows what reason. And that's what they're getting into. Upper class women enjoyed some opportunities. So, what they put here is right. I just create problems for you because a lot of you people are saying, oh, that's what's on the quiz, it's a little bit different than what's in the book. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do to you. And I'm trying to get you to think a little bit outside of the box. And get outside of the jargon, blah, 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 and think exactly what it means. Upper class women enjoyed some more opportunities. And they mean exactly that in a monarchy and a court, women are more influential than in a system like you have a city-states, where all men come in and fight in the political battle between political parties and so on and so forth. Anyways, that's what I mean. And they give you a clue. The roles of monarchs' wives. Anyways. Greek were elephants. We talked about elephants. Nice animals. Anyways, interesting. There is a famous saying of the English, two English gentlemen were talking about India and say, oh, there is animals called elephants. And what do they look like? Oh, don't worry. When you see an elephant, you recognize it, right? And elephants are kind of like that. You can't describe an elephant when it looks like a big dog. Really. But when you see one, you're like, oh yeah, that's an elephant. Right, so anyways. So I guess that's why the elephants ended up in that. But not only because of that, they ended up in the book because when the Greeks brought the elephants in, and they brought the elephants from India, right? How do you get them from India to Greece? Well, elephant on the ship, and then follow the coast, the Red Sea, all the way here to Egypt. And then from Egypt, you have to take them overland, and you bring them to the Mediterranean. And the people in the Mediterranean were shocked, because they've never seen elephants before. The other way to bring elephants is to bring them from Africa, safari, in Kenya, in Tanzania, right? It's a still place for safari. People go there to see elephants. And as I said, these African elephants are huge ears. I think they're actually more beautiful as animals. But anyways, it's not a beauty contest. So from here, on the ship, you would bring them to Egypt. And then from Egypt, you sell them. So Egypt was sort of a place where you can go and buy an elephant for your army. This is coming up in chapter 5 when we start talking about the Romans. Okay, Hellenistic kingdoms. These are the pictures of these kingdoms. Pergamon, Macedonia, Egypt, and Syria Antioch here. At first they controlled all of this, but very quickly they lost Mesopotamia and Persia and so forth. When the Parthians, right? Parthians rose and sort of tried to revive the Persian Empire. Okay, what achievements in literature, art, science, and philosophy occurred during the Hellenistic period? That's coming up next on Thursday. We're gonna do the IDs. So some of these people are gonna be there, so that's coming up. But overall, let's see, what do they have? Two particular philosophies developed. Well, it's more than two, let's say. So far we've encountered two kinds of Greek philosophy. One was Plato and Platonism. That's a big school of philosophy that extends to this day. And then you have Aristotle and Aristotelianism. So these two we know. Two more will show up, and we'll talk about it more on Thursday. Stoics and Stoicism and Epicureanism, followers of the Greek philosopher Epicurus. You heard of the word Epicurean? There was like a Epicurean cuisine. There was a TV show. Coming up on Thursday. Don't worry about it for now. It's a golden age of right, here they are. Epicurean and Stoicism coming up. But it was a golden age of science. Science starts in the classical period, but with the emergence now of Hellenistic kingdoms, these kingdoms that are ruled by great cities like Alexandria and Antioch and Thessaloniki. The kings give money towards science, and science needs money. So the most famous scientist was Archimede. Also, Euclid, the founder of geometry. And many others, including, let's not go there. Leave it for Thursday. The art becomes a little bit different. In the Hellenistic period, classical art, we were talking about it, this contrapposto, right? Like this. Yeah. Classical pose. Hellenistic art becomes more real, like this, sculpture of a drunken woman. The classical artist would not ever present human being in such a condition. But the problems. Maccabees. And problems with this syncretism. Syncretism means mixing of cultures. And for the Jews, that meant problems. And therefore, the Maccabees. A set of brothers, one of them was Judas, who in the 2nd century BC started a rebellion against the Greeks against their king, Syrian king Antiochus. Antiochus IV in particular. And it comes out of the nature of the Jewish religion and the nature of Greek policy. The Greek policy was policy of mixing. So the Greeks came to Jerusalem and said, oh, this is the temple of your God. What do you call your God? Well, we don't call it by any name because we're not supposed to pronounce the name of God. It's a temple of the unknown God. Oh, okay, and this is the supreme. What does your God do? It's like our Zeus. And what the Greeks do? Well, they offer sacrifice to Zeus. And one of the favorite animals were the pigs. So you slaughter a pig in honor of Zeus, and the bones and the fat. If you remember Prometheus, right? This is from Prometheus story. The bones and the fat you give to Zeus. The meat you eat for yourself. The problem with the Jews is that the Jews don't eat pigs. Because according to the Jewish religion, pigs are unclean animals. So the Jews said, we can't do this. And the Greeks said, yes, you can. You have to mingle in the modern culture, syncretism, mixing, multiculturalism. And the Jews says, oh, we're not really so happy with the multiculturalism thing. And that leads to the rebellion of the Maccabees and the recreation of the ancient independent Jewish state under the Maccabees. Maccabees created a dynasty that was called the Hasmonean dynasty. Hasmonean dynasty. But more about this on Thursday when we start about the IDs and things of that sort. So that's it. Oh, I forgot to take the attendance, but anyways.